The 2025 NBA trade deadline was not only insane, but it was also already over a month ago. So I thought, let's look at these teams, let's see how they've been impacted in the month since they made these big trades, and let's give them some grades at the same time. First up, let's talk about Jimmy Butler going to Golden State and Andrew Wiggins and some other pieces going to Miami. This has been, obviously for Golden State, one of, if not the most positive trade deadline moves, not only of the season, but really that we've seen over the last couple of years. When it comes to a player completely transforming the way that a team plays, the vibe around the team, the championship contention possibilities of a team, Jimmy Butler in Golden State, for all the reasons that we've already talked about in previous videos, has been fantastic. He provides them a physicality, a strength, another playmaker alongside of Steph. We're getting some of those crazy Steph games once again that really we haven't had for a while. They don't have to rely so much on Draymond as a playmaker, which means that his defense has been better. Jimmy's defense has been pretty good. There still are question marks moving forward as Jonathan Kuminga returns and what that's going to look like with him and Butler out there. Obviously the spacing stuff in the postseason because Butler just doesn't really want to shoot threes, but overall this has been incredibly impactful for them, and I wasn't a huge fan of the deal at the time for Golden State. I believe I gave it a B just because I didn't like the new contract aspect of it, how much you're going to be paying Jimmy Butler over the next couple of seasons, but I also didn't anticipate his impact being this positive immediately because he didn't even want to go to Golden State in the first place. It was well known that he only wanted to go to Phoenix, and only after it was clear that Phoenix wasn't an option, he was okay going to Golden State. He's been fantastic. It's got to be an A+ for the Warriors. On the other hand, for Miami, I actually kind of liked the deal for them given the situation that they were in with Butler, being able to get some kind of value. You get Andrew Wiggins, you get a future first-round pick, and it just has not been a good deal at all for Miami. Obviously, we don't know what the pick is going to be. Wiggins has only played a couple of games, and the games that he did play, he wasn't very good, and they got off to a terrible start in the immediate games after the Jimmy Butler trade. I think they lost like 6 straight, and then after that, they've gone back to just being what the Miami Heat are, which is this kind of mediocre basketball team that's hanging on to the back end of the East play-in playoff standings, but obviously, they had to get rid of Jimmy. It was a situation that they had to deal with, but in terms of overall value, it has not been great for Miami. I'm going to give them like a C grade now. Obviously, it depends on what Wiggins looks like in the future. Maybe they can move that contract. Maybe they can use that pick on somebody, but right now, it's not looking good for Miami. Next, I want to talk about what should be a big name trade, but people aren't really talking about it because of the Butler stuff, and then, of course, what's happening in Dallas and LA. But De'Aaron Fox to San Antonio has been a little bit weird since he was moved there. It was a weird circumstance in the first place because it was strange to have a player say, I don't want to be here anymore, trade me to these teams, and the team be San Antonio. We understand why it was San Antonio. De'Aaron Fox wants to be the guy playing alongside Victor Wembanyama, and the assumption was those two guys together, they could push for the play-in in the Western Conference. Maybe that's going to be their dynamic duo moving forward, and Fox just hasn't been that good in San Antonio. Now, part of it is because he's been dealing with this injury to his shooting hand, or it's his finger or something like that, and overall his numbers just haven't been very good. It's not uncommon for players to struggle, especially when you're supposed to be like the main creator guy on a new team in the middle of the year, but we've had a decent sample size now of De'Aaron Fox just not being that good. Now, of course, Wemby hasn't played since the All-Star game. He's out for the rest of the year because of the blood clot issue, and obviously that impacts everything San Antonio does negatively, but if you're a Spurs fan, you're not necessarily excited about the immediate returns on De'Aaron Fox, and you're concerned still about the fact that he needs a new contract and all that stuff that was up in the air at the time that he showed up. I'm not saying they're panicking or anything is going to go badly there, but a trade that we thought was an absolute home run at the time probably is more like a B to maybe B+ range if you're being more optimistic, because Fox just hasn't been that good. But the other part of that deal that I find super interesting is Zach LaVine in Sacramento is working out pretty well. It's not that we thought Zach LaVine was going to be bad. It's just they didn't get a ton of draft compensation in exchange for De'Aaron Fox. They didn't get picks that people thought they should have, namely the Atlanta pick this year from San Antonio. But LaVine has been just pretty much what he was in Chicago. The numbers are a little bit lower, but he was having a really good season in Chicago. He's a good scorer, provides them a lot of help in the backcourt, and the Kings have been pretty good. Like, they're probably going to make the play-in. Maybe they can push for something even more than that in the postseason, and it's still not necessarily fantastic value, but it's kind of like the Jimmy Butler thing where guy says he doesn't want to be there anymore. You kind of have to get rid of him, and actually got pretty solid value looking back. It's probably more like a B to a B+ grade now for Sacramento as well, looking back on. But in terms of big trades, that's it, right? We haven't had any other potentially biggest trade deadline trades of all time to talk about, right? Of course, I'm kidding. We have Dallas and the Lakers and Luka and Anthony Davis. I've talked about this in multiple multiple videos lately. I won't spend too much time on it. Everybody knows what the grades here are, right? It's A+ for the Lakers. It's F- for Dallas. There's people now talking about should the Mavs just completely reset and trade Anthony Davis this offseason because now Kyrie's going to be out the rest of this year, potentially most of, if not all of next year with an ACL tear. AD's played like 30 minutes with Dallas because he got hurt in his very first game. Should they just completely reset everything and trade him? That's the point that we're at. When 6 weeks ago, as of the recording of this video, the Mavs looked like, oh, we get Luka back, maybe we'll make the finals again. And now it's, we might need to just get rid of everybody and reset it. Kyrie needs a new contract when his knee isn't even intact. Anthony Davis has played less than one full game since the trade. The entirety of the fan base is rioting. And oh, by the way, we don't have full control of our first round picks again until like 2029 or 2030. That's the entirety of the Mavs-Lakers situation. We know where that one's at. It's an A+ for the Lakers, F- for Dallas, but I can't really make the video without talking about probably the biggest NBA trade of all time. But those aren't the only trades from the trade deadline that we need to evaluate. Let's talk about Kyle Kuzma to Milwaukee. Obviously, there's other pieces in the deal. I'm not really going to spend a lot of time talking about Chris Middleton and Marcus Smart's impact on the Washington Wizards, right? But Kuzma in Milwaukee has been interesting because they've been a very up and down, a very streaky team all season long. And since the Kuzma trade, they didn't get off to a great start, but they've kind of figured some things out. Now, his numbers overall are perhaps a little bit inflated because Giannis has been on this weird minutes restriction lately and missed some games, and so Kuzma's numbers are a little bit higher than maybe you would anticipate. But I think the biggest difference for Milwaukee and why this is kind of working for them right now is because he's actually playing. Like, that was the biggest issue with Chris Middleton, was that he wasn't available. And Kuzma has played every game since he showed up to Milwaukee. And it's not like he's been game-changing for them, but he provides them some different options in terms of lineups. And whatever happens with Milwaukee is still going to revolve around Giannis and Dame in terms of where they're going to go in the postseason. But having an available third guy that can play alongside those two guys, can guard a little bit, and Kyle Kuzma has been very helpful. I think it's been like a B+ to an A grade so far for them. Even though they've been very streaky, they've had some nice wins recently, like that Denver game a couple of nights ago, again, as of the recording of this video. And Milwaukee's quietly kind of figured it out a little bit with Kyle Kuzma on the roster. I'm not saying that they're going to be threatening to Boston and Cleveland in the postseason, but it is Giannis. You can never count them out. And I wouldn't be surprised if it goes the other way, if Kuzma's just terrible in the postseason. But given what their options were at the time, it's been a pretty good return. It's probably a B+ to an A grade right now for Kuzma in Milwaukee. This next one, though, is probably my favorite crazy star-breaking trade that happened at the deadline. And that is DeAndre Hunter going to Cleveland, because this was a bigger deal than you realize at the time. Teams that were on the pace that Cleveland was on at the time, I believe as of the recording of this video, they're like 52-10. That's a crazy record. And that's the pace that they were on at the trade deadline as well. Those kinds of teams don't trade rotation pieces in the middle of the season. It just doesn't happen. You keep your guys together. Why would you want to mess with what you have going on? And Cleveland traded a significant piece in Caris LeVert away to bring in DeAndre Hunter. And it was a pretty, not necessarily a risk, because it's not like they're trading away Donovan Mitchell in the middle of the season or anything, but it was definitely somewhat of a risk because you could mess with kind of the vibes you brought together with this really great team. Hunter has been awesome, and he's been exactly what they thought that he would be and hoped that he would be. Him and Ty Jerome off the bench for Cleveland is just really tough for other teams' second units to deal with. He provides them size, depth, and optionality in terms of their end of game lineups, where like with that crazy comeback against Boston not too long ago, they went with Mobley at the 5 to finish the game, and then they had DeAndre Hunter playing alongside him. So in scenarios where they don't want to play both bigs to finish games, now they have an actual option to play at the 4 in DeAndre Hunter, whereas before you were trying to kind of push Isaac Okoro or Max Strus or somebody else out there. Now one of those guys can be out there, probably Strus, and you could also have Hunter as well. For a team that made a little bit of a risk making that much of an in-season trade in terms of messing with their rotation, it's been an A++ for them. I love what DeAndre Hunter is providing for them. The biggest issue with him is if he's going to be healthy. That's been the issue for years in Atlanta. If he's healthy, it's an absolute upgrade for a team that right now looks like they are on the same level as the defending champion Boston Celtics, which is pretty crazy to say about a Cleveland team that we certainly did not have that level of expectations for before the season. The last one to talk about here as well is Brandon Ingram going to Toronto. He hasn't actually played with them, so it's not necessarily an update. The only update that we have is that he signed a big new extension with Toronto. And I talked about this a little bit online, but I haven't actually made a video about it. I'm not fully understanding what exactly Toronto is doing. When you look at their payroll structure, when you're talking about RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Scotty Barnes, Jakob Poeltl, and Brandon Ingram, those 5 guys together, Poeltl, who they'll probably get rid of this offseason to save some money, but those guys together making like $157 million or something combined between those guys. If all 5 of those guys play Are you making the play-in? Are you guaranteed to make the play-in, the playoffs? You're spending a ton of money on a roster that, yes, we haven't seen Brandon Ingram actually fit in with this group yet, but I was a little bit unsure about what they were doing at the time when they traded for Ingram, and now I'm certainly confused about the long-term goals of the roster. I understand re-signing him to an extension once you trade for him, but I wasn't a huge fan of the trade at the time for this exact reason. You're going to have to pay a guy that the Pelicans were having a pretty hard time getting rid of over the last year and a half or so because of the money he was going to have to make. It might end up working out perfectly for them. I think right now I'm more in like the C to C minus category for the Brandon Ingram trade. But again, he hasn't even played for them, so we'll have to wait and see. Those are all of the big deals that happened at the 2025 NBA trade deadline now just 1 month later, and I can't wait to continue to evaluate and see where these trades go from here.